My name is Jenny Willmore, and I am the online teaching coordinator. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what might be happening in the age of AI if we are not really thinking about how we define success. And I wanted to start with this image. This is an image that won an art competition in 2022. It caused a controversy because even though the judges were aware of this, they still awarded it first prize in an art competition, even though it had been created with the help of the AI generating software Midjourney. This started to bring up all kinds of questions that had been lingering for a while about what it meant to be successful in the art world. And it turns out it wasn't the first time that that kind of question was asked. In the 1800s, the prevailing painting type and style and movement was realism. And this was based on the idea of can you replicate reality accurately? So most of the painters, as you can see in the examples, were really concerned with making sure that they created an honest representation of what the eye could see. They wanted to replicate things. They wanted to make something look like an exact copy of something that had already been done. So what also ended up happening about the same time is that the camera came about. So around the same time, the daguerreotype came out, and by 1870, the camera had almost completely replaced the the portraitist as being the main way that people would capture historical events and landscapes, and a lot of times people too, portraits of people. So this brought up a real kind of crisis in the art world. And they asked if cameras were going to be better at replicating, at reproducing something that already exists, then what was going to be the purpose of painting? What was next for painters? What was next for artists? Well, it turned out that instead of trying to compete with the camera, the artists of the time, Monet and Van Gogh and Picasso, started asking interesting questions like, well, if I'm not tied to the idea of repeating and replicating and copying something, then what could I do with paint? And so the movements of expressionism, impressionism, and cubism and abstract art came about, where they're under this umbrella of modernism because the idea was that it was a reaction against this literal replication of what could be seen. And instead, they brought in other elements of success. Like, could I be successful in conveying my emotions? Could I be successful in conveying the play of light? Could I play around with people's perceptions or their perspectives? So by bringing in and really reconsidering what success looked like and not basing their success only on replication and reproduction, there ended up being a huge boom in painting. And that doesn't mean that realism was suddenly bad art. It just meant that if somebody decided that they were going to paint a very realistic portrait, that was their deliberate artistic choice. Rather than just having to fulfill a technical reality, rather than saying, but everybody has told me that that's what success is. When that, as the main reason that you knew you were succeeding, was taken out, then suddenly it could be a creative choice to reproduce and to copy something that existed already. But it wasn't the only way that you could measure or demonstrate success in art. I think that AI is doing something similar in higher education. I think I was a Spanish teacher for 26 years. And I know that there is a place for memorization and for showing that you can go through important processes. I think those still have value in education. But I think that AI is helping us to see that this replication, this reproduction, this repetition maybe shouldn't always ought to be the primary evidence that we have of success, that should not always be the definition of success. So why is somebody who's working for USU Online coming and talking to you about this? Because online teachers have already been forced to kind of wrestle with some of the things that AI is introducing, asking interesting questions about what success looks like. asking how are instructors essential to learning? Because in moving education out of traditional classrooms onto a computer, we've had to ask a lot of questions about whether or not we were measuring success correctly and whether or not we really wanted reproduction and whether we really wanted repetition and whether we really wanted to replicate something that already existed, if that was the point of education. USU Online has four pillars of excellence in teaching. These were these are things that all teachers need to be doing, whether no matter where you're doing it, no matter what the modality is. But these were four things especially that we found that instructors really needed to be conscious of and intentional about when they moved their classes online. Because a lot of these things were things that were very natural to do in a physical online space and or a physical classroom space. And when you moved online, suddenly you had to stop and ask yourself, how am I going to accomplish this? What is this actually going to look like? What was I trying to get at when I created this kind of activity? As I said, these pillars, it's been helpful for me to think of how AI might disrupt teaching and how we might need to go back and ask what does success look like? And is memorization, repetition, repeating processes really the best way for someone to demonstrate their learning? I think that it has been really helpful to think about these pillars. And I'm going to especially talk about the last three of them because I think those are important no matter what modality you're teaching in. So the first one thing that I think online teachers really have hit home to them is the importance of a learning space being human-centered. I think you start to recognize how much we accidentally center the content of a class and the information of a class. And we think in terms of, I got to cover this many chapters. I've got to get them through this book. They've got to learn these three theories. Instead of saying, these are people, and I need to make sure that I get them to this destination, this learning destination. Online learning has to be really intentional about not doing that and about centering the learner and make sure that the learner is at the center of all of the decisions that are made about how the class is run. Because since learning is abundant, since knowledge is abundant, information is abundant, content is abundant, you can find just about anything, answers to any questions that you want now with the help of the internet and AI. What really becomes critical to education, you realize when you are in an online class, is the environment that's being created for you to learn in. So just the communication that an instructor has with students, the community that they are creating, how they are making sure that a space and a comfort level is being created so that students can take intellectual risks, so that they can ask questions, so that they can collaborate with others. That creation of that space and that community is actually what you start to learn needs to take place in order for the student to learn the content, instead of the student needing to conform to things so that they can be fed the content. That's something I think that's going to be really important for us to recognize in when AI starts to disrupt our classes more and more. Even when it comes to things like announcements, do we think of announcements as, here's information I need to share? When we get up in the front of the class for the first few minutes, are we thinking, I need to deliver this content, share this information, tell them this fact? Or are we stopping and are we saying, this is an opportunity for me to model professional rules. This is an opportunity for me to model curiosity. This is an opportunity for me to set the day up, set the mood for the day so that everybody is engaged and everybody is curious. So that is the first thing that online instructors recognize is how intentional they need to be about communication and connection and just making sure that they are focusing on the learner and how the learner can receive the content. The second kind of follows, and that is continuous improvement. Another thing that kind of becomes obvious when you are missing that in-person component of interacting with students is how dry some of our grading is and how little help it is for a student to just get a number 85 on their paper. I think you start to notice that without the ability to just kind of do the back and forth talking to each other, you start to realize that we have really centered the product instead of the process. That we are saying you have to create something that replicates this thing, you have to reproduce this. And again, as the artists did in the 1800s, I think it's worth asking ourselves, is that really what we want? Or is there something else that would indicate success? I think something that online instructors have recognized is that it's a really good idea for for this feedback process, for grading to actually become something where we are coaching students through working a solution. That becomes more important. The process of getting to the correct answer is more important than the correct answer itself. And that is something where, again, I think is something that actually highlights the need for instructors instead of threatening the role of the instructor. I think if we really center the process and we say, yeah, I know that AI could produce a product that is exactly like this, but what is it doing are you through the process learning something, and are you growing? So that is something that I think online we have been trying to help instructors see how they could be coaches and how they could be mentors and how they could be guiding students through a learning process rather than just waiting and evaluating things and grading things. And that leads me also to the last of our pillars, which is authentic learning. Another thing that you notice when you move to an online classroom, I think, is that because assignments are really the way that we gauge whether or not somebody is learning, we don't want them to be replicates. We don't want someone to be able to reproduce them. We don't want them to be copies of something else. So what options do we have otherwise? What do we have if we recognize that we don't want to be rewarding following directions or reproducing something exactly? Because the problems that they see in the world are not going to be solvable by reproducing something exactly. So authentic learning is this idea of, instead of saying if you're compliant on this test, then you'll pass the class. Instead of saying that, we're saying here are a whole bunch of ideas, here are a whole bunch of abilities, here are a whole bunch of skills that we're sharing with you. We need to know if you can apply them. We need to know if you can apply them in different contexts, and we need to know if you recognize how that connects with your life. Doing this, and again, with the previous two steps, creating a community where they can talk about this with you and with others, creating a place where the process is the point and where you can walk them through this. What they really need, again, is not more information. What they need is they need somebody who is there helping them to make sound judgments while they're walking through these processes and these problems that are complex and that are ambiguous and that are human. If we can do that, then we will be giving them the kind of learning that they absolutely can take out into the world. It makes the meaningful for them too. They can see how this will apply in their civic life or in their personal life or in their future community of practitioners. So the question, I think, of what remains unique about how instructors help students use knowledge to learn is more interesting to me than how can we keep our students from using AI. I think that is a question that is worth asking. And I think it's something that, like I said, online instructors have already started getting some hints as to how to answer. I just want to encourage you reach out to people who have been teaching online. If this is something that is worrying, that's concerning you, that the way that AI might disrupt your classroom, it's something online instructors have been through before. They're starting to shift their mindsets. We also have amazing resources. We have instructional designers with Amy Carpenter and her team, and then I for course delivery and just how to kind of work within, how to live in those spaces, those online classes that you're created, how to do this connection, how to do this community building, and how to build these authentic activities for your students. We would love to sit down with you and talk to you. We would love to learn from you. We would love to share what our experiences have been. And we would just love for this to turn into an opportunity for us to find something like the modernists did, where they say, what if we expanded what success looked like? What if we intentionally said that might not be the only way to succeed at teaching? That might not be the only way to succeed at being a student. And we would love to have those conversations with you, love to help you in any way we can, love to learn from you if you have already started figuring out some of these answers. So thank you so much for your time and for participating in this conference. I'm excited about the possibility it has to just really improve our experience and the student experience at Utah State.